Hi and welcome today. We're coming from the beautiful Mount Lofty. It's a lovely park where people come down into this park to do all sorts of things. People go for a hike, sometimes they bring their animals around to do a walk, and some people have barbecues. Parks are a wonderful place like that, especially sometimes, you get a bit of sunshine, not so much today. But parks also can be a place where kind of be a bit scary. You know how it can be when maybe you're out at a park at night, maybe there's a mist that starts to surround it, and it's almost like fear starts to emerge from the ground. We hear things that surround us. Sometimes they're real noises, and some of them are even imagined noises. Something that is good can become scary. And I feel like 2020 has been kind of like that. Normally, life for most people is pretty decent within an Australian context, but 2020 has been a difficult year. And you remember how we started this year with the despair of fires and seeing our country burnt on fire. Seeing people, men and women and children, their homes being burnt to the ground. Seeing so much of our beautiful animal life being destroyed. Hearts were breaking to see things under deep distress. It was incredibly painful, wasn't it? And then that gave way to this once in a lifetime medical pandemic. There's no real words for it, are there? I can recall back to March when people were hoping that maybe this pandemic, it will be here for a few weeks and then we'll be kind of over it. I remember sitting down with our staff team and talking about our plans for the next weeks and months, and we were kind of thinking, let's be really bold in our thinking and think, we need to prepare as if this pandemic's going to be around for 6 months. The truth is that here we are in the middle of December, 9 months on, and we're still feeling the impact of it. And I know that as we've gone through this time of this pandemic, there's been kind of like this different cycle that we've been through. After the first 6 or 8 weeks, there was kind of a sense of, okay, we can manage this. We've sort of got some things under control. We noticed in our Australian context how the illnesses and the virus wasn't spreading so rapidly. Things seemed to be under control. It was difficult, but we sort of seemed to be managing it okay. And then the graphs seemed to head up, didn't it? When we hit June. And when June was the time when, for many of us who have children, they went back to school, and things seemed to be under control and heading in a good direction. But then, as we know, the second wave hit. And the second wave, in my mind, was incredibly difficult. It was kind of like one of those situations where maybe you've done this, where you've gone for a hike and the hike is 5 kilometres. And so mentally you prepare yourself, you say, okay, I'm going for 5 kilometres, it's going to take me this long, I'm going to get to this destination, and that's what it's going to be. And then you get to near where you think the end is and you discover, wait a sec, we were wrong. It's not 5Ks, in fact it's 10Ks. And that burst of energy, that sense of here's the finish line, is gone. And it's almost like you just go, I can't handle this. You've gone from a situation where, like in an Australian context, for us where we were handling COVID-19, where we were thinking, phew, it's going to be over in June, we hit that second wave and it was just, that real sense of despair, that situation where, what are we going to do? And I think for most of us, and particularly as you listen to people across our neighbourhoods and in our state, people really suffered. There was a real struggle, wasn't it? We kind of headed into parts where it was a bit of a funk and people really downcast in all that we were doing. I recently read a summary of the Australian Productivity Report from last year, and it had these sorts of comments. It said the report estimated that mental ill health and suicide in Australia directly cost the country between $45 and $70 billion. The Productivity Commission mentioned that 1 in 5 people experience mental illness every year. Half of all Australians will be diagnosed with a mental health condition over their lifetime. These are incredibly pervasive statistics, because that means that today 1 in 5 of us, 1 in 2 of us will experience some sort of struggle like that. Now, every year, 65,000 Australians attempt suicide. More than 3,000 are successful. Suicide is the #1 killer amongst young people. And it doesn't take a degree in psychology to imagine that things have gotten harder this year. For some of us, the struggles have manifested themselves in really deep places, in dark places. But for all of us, it's been a part of our life. I've got to say that I've found this year parts of it incredibly difficult. I feel like part of that has been multiplied by events around the world. One of the things that I like to do is read newspapers and journal articles from a variety of different sources. And as I was reading different things, it just seemed like there was one dark event after another. Whether it was stories of hospitals overflowing or needing to build bigger morgues, economies tanking, the world seeming so divided, relationships soured between countries and seemed to multiply like the weeds in my garden. You know, I don't know if you, but when we watch the news, we see it doesn't matter what your political persuasion. As we've watched the United States over this past year, the once country where it seemed like it had this united patriotic spirit degenerated into a divided nation. And we see this everywhere. People divided politically, people divided socially, economically, people divided racially, people yelling in the echo chamber of their social media. And it seems sort of sometimes so overwhelming. I mean, you think about in our own country, in our local situation. In Australia, it seemed like that we started out pretty well. The response to COVID-19, our national cabinet came together with federal politicians and state politicians, and they seemed to be working together cohesively, cooperatively, in a sense of unity. But then under pressure and time, things deteriorated, didn't they? It's disheartening. You know, us Aussies, so often we sit in our corner of the world, our peaceful corner of the world, almost bliss-like. We're kind of surrounded by beaches and surf, and we think that things can't touch us. But even in the last recent weeks, we've noticed this kind of division between Australia and China, where we see foreign affairs leaders throwing mud and slinging off at each other and making comments, and we're going, where does this head? Where has this darkness come? We see these economic concerns, these political concerns. You know, the truth is that we live in a broken world. We live in troubled times. And that brokenness is, of course, not just a global situation. We live in a broken economy. You know, it's one thing for me, for some of you who don't know, I come from a finance background. It's one thing for me to make sort of comments about something like, well, economic terms have, gross GDP has dropped by 5.6% over the past year. And that might seem like a very kind of general statement, and it mightn't mean much to people, but the truth is it does mean a lot when it means this, that many people have lost jobs. They've lost that sense of value for contributing to society, to being able to support their families and loved ones. When we hear about those situations, we're reminded about people who have poured time and heart and effort into businesses, only to see them go belly up during these difficult times. Our governments have tried to support as best that they can and have poured money into the economy. But still there will be a great sense of debt hanging over future generations like the sword of Damocles. We live in a broken world, and we've experienced this broken economy, and we've also got, sadly, so many broken families. You know, since the coronavirus pandemic began, the average family has been spending an extra 40 hours a week together. 40 hours a week might sound great, but sometimes those 2,400 minutes have been difficult. We can laugh about things like, well, I've had to pick up a whole lot of extra coffee cups or crumbs of toast from everywhere. That's the easy part. But then the stresses begin, don't they? For some of us who have been parents, we've been involved in beginning to teach our children again, maybe at different stages of life. For some of us, we've been winding back the memory clock to think about maths problems from 30 years ago. And all these add up to a pressure, because there has been a pressure. We know that there's been an increase in broken families and broken relationships. There are reports from governments around the world showing spikes in divorce rates. where once those annoying behaviours that sort of lay behind the surface start to bubble up to the top. And they're magnified because there's no escape. The housework that gets neglected, the financial pressures of life, the screen time escapes, or that sense of lack of support end up in broken families. One government report on divorce mentioned it this way. It said that trivial matters in life led to the escalation of conflicts, and poor communication has caused everyone to be disappointed in marriage and make the decision to divorce. And I want to say to you that when a family breaks up, there is never joy. There's only pain, isn't it? Broken families and broken relationships and broken lives. I know that over the last months I've heard from a number of different people I know about people who they are connected to who have committed suicide. And tragically, lives have been lost. A day ago I got a call from a friend of mine, a good friend of mine from up north, telling me that one of our soccer mates, his brother-in-law, had committed suicide. And tragically, these pressures are the expression of this broken world and this troublesome time that we live in. For many people, it's not just that extreme, but it's in a sense of aloneness. People who are seeming so isolated. I read one story which indicates maybe something about how you're feeling even today. It's a report about how loneliness gets accentuated before Christmas time. A British doctor shared this story about his interaction with an elderly lady by the name of Doris. And Doris is 82 years old and a hospital patient. 2 days before Christmas, she seemed healthy and ready for discharge. But for some reason, she kept complaining about inexplicable health issues. The doctor wrote, yesterday it was her arm that was hurting, before that her hip. The truth is that Doris is an incredibly healthy 82-year-old and we can't find anything. I have no doubt that it will be the same today, he wrote. When the x-rays came back normal, he told Doris that he would have to stick to the plan of sending her home. Doris looked down at the floor and quietly said, I don't want to go home. It's just that I'm all alone and there are so many hours in the day. And then after a long pause, she sighed and looked at the doctor. Doctor, is there any cure for loneliness? You know, later on the doctor reflected on this incident. He said, I wish that I could say yes. I wish that I could prescribe her some antidepressants and be satisfied that I had done my best. But the truth is she is not clinically depressed. It's just that she's been left behind. You know how that feels to be left behind? To be alone? Because there are many, many Dorises in our world today. There are many people who are feeling isolated and alone. Many thousands for whom those events seem tragic. So I want to say to you today, where do you look for hope? Where do you look for peace or for unity or reconciliation? Where do you look for a future? You know, so often we look in the wrong places, don't we? Sometimes we look to our national leaders and we hope that they will bring us some sort of joyful expectation, some sort of positive direction that's giving to us. Maybe they'll be able to paint this picture and deliver for a world that seems to be getting better, but then we look around for our experience and we say, no, that's not true. For some of us, we look for our hope in a job that will give me meaning and satisfaction, a job that will allow me to have the finances to do everything that I want, that will give me those hopes. Maybe we look for it in a relationship. Relationships are fantastic, aren't they? They're incredibly important for all of life. They're things that we celebrate together, they're things that we take a lot of joy and comfort in. But again, even those relationships of life can only deliver so much. You know, this is my message to you today, that there is one true place to look for hope. and that is in Jesus. Especially at this time of Christmas, as we're heading to it in the next days, this time of Christmas reminds us that in Jesus there is truly hope. I want to read you to a few verses from the Bible, from a book from a long time ago written by a guy by the name of Isaiah. He says at one page, he says, nevertheless there's a time of darkness and despair. It says it won't go on forever. They knew what it was to experience that sort of idea. He mentions some lands, Zebulun and Naphtali. They'll be humbled. There will be a time in the future when Galilee of the Gentiles, which lies along the road that runs between Jordan and the sea, will be filled with glory. This is talking about a time when hope will come to a certain place. It says, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a place of deep darkness, a light will shine. And here's the promise. Here's the promise of hope. For a child is born to us, a son is given. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will know no end. He will rule with fairness and justice. This is a prophecy about Jesus and Christmas 700 years before his time. You know, in history, it reminds us to look to this hope. It's a hope that's found in Jesus. Where are you looking for hope? In the midst of this world of troubled times, where are you looking? You know, I've got to say that like most blokes, I love the movie The Shawshank Redemption. And The Shawshank Redemption is a story about a guy by the name of Andy Dufresne who is sentenced wrongly to prison for life. At one stage in the movie, he breaks into kind of like the governor's area of the office, and he plays some beautiful music over the PA system. Eventually the guards break in and they take him off into solitary, and weeks after he's released from solitary, he comes back to his friends. His friends ask, how did you manage to survive in the hole? And he says it was easy. They laugh at him. How could it have been easy? He says it was easy because I had Mr. Mozart here in my heart. What he's saying is I had hope in my heart. That's what he talks about. He says that's what keeps him going. Now I want to say to you that yes, there can be some beautiful music, but there is a greater hope that you can have in your heart that will keep you going in troubled times. And that hope is in Jesus. Because Jesus actually brings true hope when it comes to unity. You know, our world is incredibly divided, but Jesus is the one who models what it is to bring people together, because he has true empathy, true compassion. Jesus is the one who lives that example of to serve rather than to be served. Christmas begins the message of reconciliation, of bringing people together. That's what eliminating disunity is all about. Because in Jesus' life, he begins this message of reconciliation. He's the one who brings this message of forgiveness, to forgive as you have been forgiven. See, Jesus is the hope for unity. Jesus is the hope for peace. In a world of conflict, Jesus brings peace. When soldiers come to arrest him, he says, why do you need to do that? Why do you need to bring your weapons? You don't, because he's a man of peace. Now, we live in a world where one of the mantras is fight fire with fire. I've never heard any fireys use that expression. They would normally say we need to fight fire with water or some sort of fire suppressant. We want to often inflame the situation. But Jesus is the one who actually brings true peace. I want to say to you that Jesus is the one who brings peace and hope for those who feel rejected and isolated, for those who feel completely alone. See, Christmas is the message of hope for those who feel rejected, for those who feel alone. Maybe that's you today. You're kind of sick of trying to earn the applause, the love and affection of others. You feel all the time you've got to put on some sort of show, got to put on some sort of face. And Jesus has hope for you. because he is the one who welcomes whoever, wherever, whenever. Jesus is the one who welcomed the prostitute who people were rejecting and condemning. Jesus is the one who shared life and a glass of water with the woman at the well who was ostracized. Jesus is the one who ate lunch with the businessman Zacchaeus who was put aside by all of his peers. See, Jesus is the one who invites people. He is the one who has hope for the lonely. It's no surprise, is it, that one of the great Christian hymns of all times is what a friend we have in Jesus. A friend who accepts. A friend who walks alongside not only in the good times but also in the difficult times. And Jesus is the one who gives hope for those who are suffering, for those who are working through all sorts of struggles. You know, there's no real way to have a relationship of any depth unless we work through the pain and the struggle. And yet Jesus doesn't remain as some sort of divine God aloof from all of humanity, but at Christmas time enters our world, enters the struggle, the pain, the laughter, but also the tears. You see, Jesus is the one who brings hope for all. You know, as we enter this time of our nation and this time on the calendar when Christmas is around, we see in our day-to-day experience how our world is a dark place. We see the brokenness that surrounds us. We see the hurt, the disunity, the pain that's a part of this world, that's been part of our experience. And in the midst of that, we desperately need hope. We desperately need some sense of where are we going and coming from? What keeps us going? That hope ultimately comes from Jesus. I want to finish just reading those verses again to you today, because Jesus is hope for troubled times. For a child is born to us, a son is given to us. The government will rest on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. His government and its peace will never end. He will rule with fairness and justice from the throne of his ancestor David for all eternity. And it's my prayer for you today that you would know that hope that's found in Jesus.